Before I start showing the last exercises of week 5, do any of you have any feedback on what you've done so far? Anything you've noticed? Any improvements? Has there been anything that you feel has been unnecessary, superfluous? Has it been too difficult? Any thoughts?
I found it to be really helpful and like applicable to what I do. So like I feel like I'm able to pay a little more attention to my spine and move it a little more like freely outside of my hips, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and like I did a modern technique class last week for the first time in a long time, and I was able to, like kind of flow through that and still be able to like on the counts and all of that because I was like in touch with my spine. What's going on?
Okay, good.
Good. I've been hitting the ballet hard and I'm stiff, so it's good to like bring more movement and like get out of that a little bit.
Okay.
Oh my god, I felt scandalized, but it's good. It's fun.
Okay, good. So one of the positions that I saw that some of you had some issues with was the figure 4 tied. If you guys remember that, Samantha, I know that you've had some issues with your pelvis. Well, some issues is an understatement, but it is a limiting factor. Did anyone? David, I know that you mentioned something about the figure 4 as well. Anyone else who felt some sort of restriction that didn't allow you to practice the tide in that position?
Yeah, me too.
You too? You felt it? Okay.
On one side.
On one side. Okay. Mike, you felt okay?
It was definitely more restricted on one side than the other. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I felt more restricted on one side than the other, but I felt okay. I found just with that and the split stance, those two, just with regard to paying attention to the physical sensations, I found with those two, it was just too much going on to be able to focus on any one particular sensation at a time. I constantly just went back into almost like a fight or flight. Yeah. Whereas that like constant state of slight anxiety being in before, but was able to move.
So that happened in both the tall split stance and the figure 4?
Yeah, the tall split stance, as at first I walked into posterior pelvic tilt. Once I walked the second time, it got a little bit easier to kind of flow through.
Okay, so tall split stance, posterior pelvic tilt, and figure 4. Good to know. Anyone else who noticed any type of limiting factor in any of the other positions?
I guess I jumped on late, so I'm going to go with what I felt was probably the hardest part for me. I think it was last week's when we had the 3 transitions in the hinged position. The third translation was definitely my hardest, but I also feel that's some of my limiting factor from thoracic to cervical spine. Going in that upward motion, I would feel a slight pain, but I think I naturally go into flexion on my thoracic too easy because I have a hard time doing extension on thoracic, or I just don't have a great extension on thoracic. So I feel that third translation was more painful for me. I totally jumped in late, so I guess this is what you guys are talking about.
Yeah. No, we were talking about emotions right now. No, it's just all the emotions. Okay, so the hinged in extension, was it, Melissa? Or was it flexing?
The third translation,
Mm-hmm.
in the hinged position, going into extension, yes,
Going
was
into extension.
probably the one where I would feel more pain, and it felt very awkward.
Was it more located towards your cervical spine, or was it closer to like the thoracic lumbar junction?
Yeah. It's definitely that transition between the thoracic and the cervical. So,
okay.
But I know that's also where, because I have my whole rounded shoulders, they're so pretty. My extension is lacking there. So
okay.
that was my limiting factor.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Then I will try to add in some alternative to that tight exercise, and for the figure four as well.
I will say though, from that finding, I have been just now throughout the day, just going into a very deep stretch and finding my triple chin, and just working that, because I've got to increase the triple chin. I stretch through that part of my spine, so I think that was just more of an eye-opener for me.
Okay, good. Well, cervical extension and thoracic extension is something that we don't often get to work on in a hinged position, especially the thoracic extension, because usually when we work on some sort of neutral spine, work on some sort of extension, we're in a loaded movement like an RDL or a deadlift or something like that, and when we do go into extension. When we're unloaded, it's usually in a more upright position, where there's no real resistance. There's no load forcing you to fall into flexion. So it is, even though it may sound very basic, just go into extension while you're hinged. It's not a very common thing to do. So yeah, it is a tricky movement. It will be a tricky movement for a lot of people. But good. I'm glad to hear that you've to put it like Jonathan would say, that you have discovered and that you have been enlightened and that you have been faced with some revelations in your practice. I'm learning.
You even got like the voice inflection.
Oh, it's the funniest thing, because I don't know. He even sounds like Bruce Lee when he's talking. It's amazing. He sounds like he was raised on the streets of Hong Kong by a German and Chinese parent, because he will talk like this, and the consonants, they're so clear. But okay, well, I guess if any one of you have any other feedback, anything that you notice in any of the weeks or any of the exercises where you noticed some discomfort that didn't you didn't progress, or it didn't get removed, please let me know, and I will take that into account when I do the last modifications on the spinal wave course.
May I give some positive feedback?
How dare you, sir? No,
Sure. I think it was after week 1. You gave this like chest popping, where we took a breath with our chest, held our chest up, and breathe it out, keeping the chest high.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big revelation for me, just emotionally, how I got contact with like my middle part of the spine.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of seeing my spine as 2 parts, it became like 3 parts, just with that one exercise.
Oh, that's very cool.
So that was really cool. So I've been doing a lot of breaths like that just to get that feeling.
Oh, and you can do it in loads of different ways as well. Just doing something like breathing instead of breathing into your chest, you can try to breathe into your lumbar spine, or you can try to expand your rib cage and not focus on going into extension, and then breathing out and maintaining that position of the rib cage or the lumbar spine. It's a very good way of experiencing some new positions and getting some new sensations about this.
So what it made me do was actually try to find how I breathe in every spinal exercise. So it took it to a new level, just that one thing. So it was really cool.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah.
One more. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Melissa. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, because a positive thing, back to what I was referencing, that revelation that I gained, it made me think of when I do any of my Jefferson curls now, even if it's just a body weight Jefferson curl, I realized I was jumping almost a whole section and just going right to thoracic and to Jefferson. And so now I've slowed down almost every movement to make sure I'm hitting all through the cervical down to thoracic. So sorry, I should end on a positive note too.
No, any feedback is good feedback, but of course I'm very happy to hear that you felt some improvement, or that you noticed something new. That's great. But yeah, the whole idea behind the spinal wave course isn't necessarily that everyone should do a spinal wave, but it's more about what the exercise teaches you. It's like in conventional strength training, one of the benefits of rowing isn't that you learn how to row and that you do that perfectly, but that you learn more about your scapula. It's that you learn more about your shoulders and your neck. And the same thing with a deadlift. It's the first thing you learn from a deadlift isn't to get crazy strong hips, but it's that you learn how to bend your hips. And the same thing should, well, in my opinion, should happen in a spinal wave. It should teach you about your spine before you move it the way that you've been told how it should be moving in a spinal wave. So that's great. That makes me very happy. Well, okay. Without further ado, let's jump into the first exercise of our last week of spinal waves. And the first exercise is, as per usual, a tied exercise. So the tied exercise here will be performed from a standing position, and we are going to work in several angles. So you, Melissa, you will still be going into extension while you're hinged, but this time we're going to try to add in more variables. It's going to be technically more difficult because we're going to be going into extension and flexion while we are in different degrees of hip flexion. So the first thing we're going to start off with is we're going to go into translation number 3, basic standing translation number 3. Now from here, we are going to slowly go into just a vertical translation number 1. So standing translation number 1. So again, shake. Translation number 3, directly into translation number 1. And from here, we're going to hinge at the hips so that our spines are in a 45 degree. We're going to do a translation number 2. So we just did 3, then we did 1, and then we did 2. And when we did the second translation here, we are in a 45 degree angle. And the last is another 2 while in 90 degrees. So the easiest way of thinking about this is, don't think about translation 1, 2, 3. Don't make it too complex. Think that you want to be able to push your chest and your thoracic spine as much as you can. First, up, down, diagonally, no, sorry, then horizontally forward, horizontally back, diagonally down, diagonally back, directly down, and directly up. See, there's a bit of noise. I'm just gonna, there we go. That's better. Okay. So once more, guys. The chest goes up, the chest goes down, the chest goes forward, the chest goes back, chest goes diagonally down, diagonally up, directly down, and directly up. And then we reverse. Forward, back, diagonally down, diagonally back, directly down, directly up, diagonally forward, diagonally back, forward, back, and then up and down again. So it's a complex drill. There are many different angles that you're playing around with, but try not to think so much about the precise translations that we've been working with the past 4 weeks. Don't think about translation 1, 2, 3. Just think up, down, forward, back, diagonally down, diagonally up, directly down, directly up. This is, first and foremost, it's a skill. It's kind of a mini choreography, but it's also a way for you to notice whether or not your ability to create flexion extension has improved. So it is an exercise, and it is a test kind of the spinal wave tides that you've been practicing so far. But one of the most important aspects of this is to simply being able to go into flexion extension into different angles and being able to link them together so that you don't have to overthink the technique as much. We're trying to remove technique by instead focusing on not precise articulations of every single part of the spine, but simply thinking about directions: up, down, forward, back, diagonally down, diagonally up, down, up. And then you're just going to play with that until it feels a bit more comfortable. Any questions about that or that exercise? You're all, Samantha, yes. Hello.
I have a question about the breathing. Is it whatever you like?
Whatever you like, but first try to find the breathing pattern that facilitates both the extension and the flexion in the best possible way. So if you feel like an inhalation on the extension helps, which is usually what will happen, then please by all means do that. And the opposite is true for the flexion. Exhalation usually helps with flexion. But do try to experiment with a couple of different things. Like if I breathe too deeply into my belly, if I do like a hinged tide, if I do it a hinged tide and I go into extension and I breathe into my belly, then I feel like it's actually making things a bit more difficult for me. So try to notice whether or not you're breathing into your neck, into your chest, into your ribs, your stomach, and just play around with it and see what facilitates the most amount of movement. In the long, if we're thinking about the long game, then of course trying breathing patterns that makes it more challenging will be beneficial. Not necessarily for the immediate performance, but for the long-term result. But generally, just inhale on extension and exhale on flexion. Any other questions? Are we good? Yes, it seems like we're good. Okay, so then let's look at this week's ripple exercise. And it's actually two different ripple exercises that we will be linking together. So the first is going to be thoracic circles. Let's see here. So in the last week, we started playing around with these, the thoracic weave and the thoracic Vitruvian man, where we went from side to side, slid back and forth like this. And now we're going to start to we're introducing a tide in between. So first, I'm going into a tide, basic tide, going into extension, while making sure that my chest is facing forward. I'm not dropping my chest. I'm not pulling my chest up towards the ceiling. And from here, we go into our thoracic weave. So in the thoracic weave, you should notice that your nose is above your chin and your chin is above your sternum, like this. Under that, there will be lateral flexion, but your nose should be above your chin, chin above sternum, and then there's a side bend after that. And let's see. After that, we go into our tide flexion, opposite side, again, nose over chin, chin over sternum, and then we go to the front again. So first, just try to establish all 4 positions. Tide extension, weave, tide flexion, weave, tide extension, and just establishing every single position. Now, after some time, when you feel comfortable, you can try doing it a bit more smoothly. A general guideline here when you're practicing your thoracic circles is to imagine that your clavicles, they're on the same horizontal line. So you'll see my shoulders will move a bit up and a bit down. I do that simply because it feels better. It feels like I'm able to create more flexion and extension, but the clavicles themselves will usually remain in this horizontal line here. So as you can see, when I go into, let's see here, now I'm going to go into my weave and then my tide flexion. As I'm doing that, you'll see that I'm leading with one shoulder. So now this shoulder, my, let's see, I don't know what I'm doing. Draw. This shoulder here is now leading my spine into flexion. So as you can see now, I'm leading with that shoulder into flexion. And then the other shoulder starts to go into flexion as well. So one shoulder is always leading into the tide flexion, and the other shoulder leads into tide extension. I love how dead my eyes look in this video. So that is the thoracic circles. Next thing is cervical circles. Here we go. So from here, we're going to start with the same thing. We're leading our heads into an extension while making sure that we're not pointing our nose up. And then we're going to go into our cervical weave. So my forehead is above my nose is above my chin, but my chin isn't above my sternum. They're on 2 separate lines here. And after that, we go into our beautiful double or triple chin, depending on your body type. And then we go to the opposite side. Again, forehead over nose, nose over chin, but chin not above sternum. And it's going to look like this. Establishing position, position, and let's see, sorry, here we go. Position, 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 and then gradually trying to make it smoother and smoother. So in general, with the cervical circles, you're trying to get your nose as far away from your sternum, forward, to the left, to the rear, and to the right. Simply trying to guide your nose as far away from the sternum as possible in all possible directions. And here at the end of the video, I'm just playing around a bit. Now, after you feel comfortable with both the thoracic circles and the cervical circles, then you can start to link things together. So, excuse me. So, the way we would link things together is to first start off with a cervical circle. And then as soon as we go one revolution and our head is to the front, we're going to pull our chest forward. So I'm going forward, side, back, side, forward, now chest, chest, forward, side, back, side, forward, and then head again. So going one circle and then one circle. And then the opposite side, one circle and then one circle. Like that. Now, this is not going to be in the spinal wave course, but if any one of you want to try this, this is a Sploosh exclusive, is that we can try to do a thoracic weave in one direction and a cervical weave in the opposite direction. And that's when this sort of stuff starts happening. So in this movement right here, I'm creating lateral flexion in 4 different parts of my spine at the same time. First, I create a lateral flexion in the thoracic lumbar junction of my spine. And then I create a lateral flexion in the thoracic part of my spine. So here's the thoracic weave. And at the same time, I'm going to create cervical thoracic lateral flexion to one side, and then cervical lateral flexion to the opposite side. And then your head will stay put as you're going from side to side like this. This is a really, really weird movement. The easiest way of thinking about this movement is that you're going to try to move your shoulders as far over to one side as possible while making sure that your nose is staying put in the same space. Sarah is having a good time. Yes, there you go, Melissa. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Yay, good. The spine wave course works. And you can play around with this in so many different ways. As an example, I can first start doing a cervical flexion like this. Cervical flexion with a slight extension at the top. So I'm not here, but I'm here. And then I can start going into a lumbar flexion while going into a slight thoracic extension, and that's when this starts happening. The chicken head. I don't know if you guys saw the video that Ben Carey posted of the kingfisher bird. The kingfisher bird is the best bird when it comes to head stabilization. It can stand on reeds and look at its prey, but the head never moves. So these kind of movements are more from popping or electric boogaloo, robot dance, whatever you want to call it. What I love about popping is that popping is kind of, it's it's artistic FRC. You've all heard about functional range conditioning. That's what popping is, but it happens. The movements are more complex, and you learn how to apply them, apply several articulations that are very complex at the same time. So it's a really fun thing to play with. Yes, Elisa, popping classes are stressful. They really are, because it's FRC without anyone holding your hand, basically. But you can learn a lot from popping. It's a study in articulations. So those are your two ripple exercises, a thoracic circle and a cervical circle. And then you can start combining the two. The last wave exercise is a spinal wave. So this is more of a, I'm not going to show you a specific exercise, because this is all about being able to practice your spinal waves in a way that either will facilitate more movement in the parts that you want to move, or it can make your spinal wave look cooler, which is a totally legitimate reason to practice spinal waves. So first things, when we practice a spinal wave, the thing that often happens is that we try to focus on creating as much range of motion throughout the spine as possible. Unfortunately, our bodies follow the laws of physics, which means that whenever we move, we are more, we're going to move whatever parts wants to move more. So if you decide to do a multi-joint movement and you don't really think about how the joints themselves move, you will probably move whatever joint you are comfortable with moving, which can be good for the performance. But again, with the long-term results that you get from your practice, it won't necessarily be as beneficial. So throughout the spinal wave course, we focus on moving into extension, flexion, lateral flexion, and some rotation in different ways so that you facilitate more movement in specific joints. What we're going to do now is that we're going to try to minimize range of motion by our own volition. When you start practicing your spinal waves, they should be tiny. They should be almost invisible, because the range of motion that you have in any given joint, it doesn't matter if you don't know how to apply it. A range of motion is just a resource. Your movement is a budget as to how you decide to distribute those resources. So the first thing we're going to do is to try to figure out how we can move with as little effort and range of motion as possible. So when you first start practicing your spinal waves, try to make them smooth without using a whole lot of range of motion. Gradually start to increase the range of motion, and then gradually minimize the range of motion. The thing that has happened in, I guess, recent times when it comes to spinal waves is that people just want to, start doing it with the greatest range of motion possible, which is great if you look at it as, a mobility drill or a cool drill to show off. But if you want to enhance and refine your movement pattern, it's really about learning how to control the contrasts of degrees of range of motion. It's not about doing this all the time. It's about learning how you can modify, change, and gradually increase or decrease movement. So when you first start practicing your spinal waves, small, bigger, bigger, smaller, smaller, almost to the point where it's invisible. So that's the first thing you're going to practice. The second thing is that we're going to start focusing on different parts of your body and trying to create more range of motion or a more impressive visual display of those body parts. That doesn't sound right, I know. But the thing that most people focus on when they do spinal waves is the head. So they'll do, you've probably seen a spine wave like this. You've often seen hashtag movement culture after a spine wave. And it looks like this. That they just throw their head back and forward because the spine follows the head, at least in our minds. So we often try to convince ourselves that we're creating a greater range of motion by throwing our heads around. So we're going to allow you to start off with that, trying to create a spinal wave by initiating it with the head, but trying to make the movement as big as you can with the head. The next spinal wave, you're going to focus more on the thoracic spine. And the next spinal wave, you're going to focus more on your hips. So it's a moderate movement with the head, moderate with the thoracic, big with the hips and the lumbar spine. So small movement head, not a lot of movement in the thoracic spine, and then lumbar spine, hips, bigger movement. So again, head, thoracic spine, hips. Then we can do it in reverse, which means not a plunge, but a surge. So it's going to be hips, thoracic spine, head. Going into both the plunge and the surge and learning how to gain, from an artistic point of view, it's about gaining people's or getting people's attention and forcing them to look at some part of your body. Again, I know that doesn't sound right, but that's really one of the tricks to moving more aesthetically, is to understand how you get someone to look at a particular part of the movement, because movement is really, really complex. It's difficult to get to see everything that's going on at any given moment. So you really want to understand how you can make people be more attentive or focus on different parts of the movement. So that's the spinal waves, going from small to bigger, and then bigger, and then smaller, and then smaller. And then initiating or focusing more on three different body parts as you're doing the spinal waves: head, thoracic spine, lumbar spine, and hips, both going into the plunge and the surge. So just to recap, you have a multi-angled tide: chest up, chest down, chest forward, chest back, chest diagonally down, chest diagonally back, down, up. 2 ripple exercises: the thoracic circles and the cervical circles, and seeing whether or not you can start combining those 2 together and moving fluidly from one circle in the cervical spine to another circle in the thoracic spine. Spinal waves going from small to big to small, understanding how to control the degrees of range of motion, and also focusing more on either the head, the thoracic spine, and the lumbar spine as you're practicing. Now, I will use my democratic Norwegian powers to unmute you. And if you have any questions, now is the time to ask them.
I love the last drill that you showed us, because it's funny, lately, the past few weeks, I've realized I'm a product of hashtag movement culture. And my spinal waves were just like you said. I thought I was badass. I was like, look at this ring. And then I caught my glimpse in the mirror and I'm like, how much of this am I actually moving through my knees, my head, my hip? I'm like, is my spine actually doing some of the waves, or is it just all my neighboring joints looking like I'm moving through this? And so lately I have minimized or tried to block certain things to make sure I am feeling it a little bit more in the spine. So it's kind of funny, yeah. Product of culture.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that it actually does exist out in the world, not just in my head.
But I think it's because of the whole spinal waves. It's making me think in these different variables you've taught us, and not just one way that you only see online, the one way that most people post, but these different variables that you're making us put ourselves into and get our spine in flexion and extension. And I'm feeling it a lot more.
Okay.
It feels more
That's
real.
good.
It's not a fake spinal wave. Real spinal wave.
We have hashtag fake news and hashtag fake spinal waves.
Yeah.
No, but it's a weird thing because, once a spinal wave became synonymous with exercising or hashtag movement, which basically is hashtag sexy exercise, it's kind of like, it's such a wonderful body part that can move in so many beautiful ways. But it's kind of like if someone started telling people, hey, I need you to learn how to do a lateral raise. And the first thing that people started doing was this. Because you can do a lateral raise in so many different ways, different degrees of rotation in the arm. There's so many ways that a shoulder joint can move, and even more ways that your spine can move. So hopefully this will allow us to kind of change the idea about spinal waves a bit, and hopefully release some more movement in different parts of the spine. Because like I mentioned in the introduction, we shouldn't think of it as a body part. We should think of it as a part of your body that consists of a lot of different body parts that can move in a lot of different ways. So hopefully it will work. We'll see. Any other questions? Anything that you would like demonstrated again, or that you're wondering about? That would be a no, in the universal language of silence. But okay. I'm gonna. Did anyone say something?
But maybe I'm muted. Am I muted?
You are not muted.
Oh, weird.
We can't see you, but we can hear you. So.
I've been teaching undulations for years and years. I feel the way that you explain it back of my back, if that makes any sense. I always felt like my muscles were very much in the front, the musculature in the front, but always felt really quite limited in the back body. And I think this will unleash a lot more. I feel like I'll go from 50% to 100 by using the way that you explain it. I feel like we didn't think about the spine so much as the front of the way I learned it in belly dance is upper back, upper abs, lower abs. So you're thinking about it in the front, but you're not really accessing the back body.
Okay.
Break it down, really smash that. Great.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm very happy to hear that. I saw that you posted a video in the group about your was it an online course or something? An online course?
Not house, but there might be some stuff in there. There might be some in this.
Oh, cool. I'm looking forward to checking it out. Okay, good. Anyone else have anything Any questions, thoughts, ideas? I guess not. Then I'm going to stop the recording.